about time, and it's the most important thing to an editor because you need time to evaluate the footage. And what I find in television, the narrative television that I work in, oftentimes we get 3 or 4 hours of dailies a day. So, you know, the old methodology that when I first started assisting, where you'd go to a screening room and you'd sit down and you'd watch film in a linear way from start to end, and the editor would be there and you'd be making notes about the footage, is not something that I really find works for me. Because I just don't have enough hours in the day to do it. You know, I mean, it used to be that we would get 4 hours of dailies. The assistant was loading it from tape, so it'd be 4 hours to go into the system, another hour or so to organize it. So then how much time is left in the day to actually watch it and cut it? You know, it's not a lot. So the way I evaluate footage these days, because we're on a nonlinear system, I'll often march through all of the daily. Well, first what I'll do is I'll scrub through every shot very quickly, just to get a sense of what is the camera doing, how is it moving, what's the framing like, is it any good, you know. And I won't listen to any of the dialogue or anything like that. Then what I'll do is I'll watch, you know, I'll look at the line script or whatever, and I'll watch some of the key masters, just to see, kind of get a feel of the rhythm of the scene. What did the actors do? What were the performances like? How did they interpret the scene? And then what I'll do is I'll start marching through, basically, as if you're ganging all the footage. You know, I'll take all the setup and I'll watch it to a certain point or a certain key beat or moment in the scene, and I'll watch through each piece of material kind of all together and evaluate moment by moment. What are the different cameras doing? What are the actors doing? How did their performance, you know, change or develop? Or I'm doing sort of moment by moment analysis of the footage, and I'm even starting to cut right away. Like, I'm not just making a bin of selects. I'm actually making choices right away about, oh, that's great. You know, that's a great moment. That's the best moment in this particular part of the scene. And I'll start building a very rough kind of sequence, or maybe more refined sequence, depending on what I feel. So I find myself, because I don't have a lot of time, having to make a lot of choices very quickly and being able to look at a lot of material very quickly. And I'm fortunate that I have a very good visual memory. I don't take down any notes. I put a few locators on things, and it works for me. I don't know.
My approach is kind of similar to other approaches that you've heard. I mean, for me, one of the important things is, if possible, a little different on features. Like, on the one hand, you may think you have more time, maybe you do, because they're not going to be, you know, broadcasting it the following week or anything. But you do, and you are expected to pretty much be up to camera in what you're cutting. That simply means that yesterday's footage is cut today so that tomorrow it's there, cut. And, you know, my mantra is, when I cut something, it better be presentable to the point where it could go off into the theater exactly as it is. You know, that means music, sound effects, everything. Because I don't trust anyone to look at that cut material.
Yeah.
And you know how people say, oh, I know how to look at a rough cut?
No.
No, nobody knows how to look at a rough cut. You respond to it as any cut. And boy, that's slow. There's too much talking. I don't know, whatever it is. So, you know, so depending, now part of it is also a political situation as well. You have to kind of know what the politics are of the show. You know, has the director told you, because you're working for the director creatively, and you're supposed to implement their vision. So, first of all, it's a good idea to, if you haven't worked with this director before, to have some discussions with them concerning the material, just to get a sense of what it is they're looking for stylistically, you know, even before you go in. Just to take that information, stick it in your head. The other thing is, you do get script notes every day. I find the script notes are very useful because if they're done correctly, the director will be talking to his script supervisor, who will actually say, best reading of lines 7 to 12, absolutely best camera move. It's good to know, whether you believe it or not, whether you agree, it's good to know what the director's thinking. So that, you know, well, obviously he loved take 9. It's got a big star on it and it's underlined 3 times. So, you know, good to know that stuff. Then I can look at all that stuff and forget about it in a way. I've got it there as a reference. Now I can watch the material. I try to watch all the material at least once at speed. Sometimes you can't do it if there's like 10-minute takes or 8-minute takes and there's like 12 of them, and then they go to coverage. But as much as you can. So now I know, well, he or she covered the scene. In a moving master, but at take 5, they changed the move, and they changed the blocking.
Yeah.
And oh, it wasn't until take 7 that they got the lighting right. Well, that's kind of relevant, because if they change, you can use these script notes, because they tell you this, and then you can see it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it won't really matter that much, even though they've got it there, but sometimes it's really crucial. After you've looked at it, and you kind of know the material, I find it useful to start looking at the back end takes first, for a lot of reasons.
Interesting.
Technically, if it's a heavy technical kind of situation, a camera move, a steady cam move, dolly shot, whatever, it may take a bunch of takes before they get it. Sometimes, but not always, the actors get better, but then some actors are better in the first take. Whatever you do, just look at everything, get a sense of it, and then you can see where it's going. And what you may find is there's a consistency in any given show on a daily basis to what you perceived on those first few days. And then I pull stuff that I like, and I put it in selects, I pull it, I take it in chunks of the scene. Like I know the move is going to take me up to here, I'm going to cut to some kind of coverage, I don't know what yet. So I'll get the over, I'll get the tight shots, I'll get the macro tight shots, inserts, throw them in. And then I can look at everything all in one and kind of compare performances. One of the things in performance, in dramatic editing, you need a consistent performance by the actor. Some actors are going to try different stuff from take to take, but you have to be consistent so that the character arc is believable. So you may use something only because it's more consistent with the overall flow that you've been building, even if you may like a moment somewhere else it may not fit in. I know there's all these concerns. The more you do it, the more you'll become familiar with it. But, as has been said, you've got to have that first moment of objectivity, which is when you're looking at the material the first time. That's amazing, because you see stuff. Wow, that's amazing. I'm feeling it emotionally. I'm crying when I watch this performance, whatever it is. That move is tremendous, and the next line comes in, whatever it is. And then I just kind of whittle it down. Use the script as a guide, but not as a Bible. We may change lines, we may take lines out, whatever, and try to get it to work.
Do you do that in the rough cut? Start taking lines out?
I do, but part of it is you've got to know that it's okay to do that. I figure my job is to make the best version of this scene. Now, as Jack Tucker, who's I think in this audience, would always say, editing is the last rewrite, the final rewrite. That's the famous quote, and it's true. And if I see it initially, if that's my gut response, now some people are going to get pissed off. I've seen directors get pissed off at me. Why'd you take that out? Well, because it's better without it. So, maybe when you do that, because you're not going to do a lot of that up front, but by the end of the picture, you might do a whole lot of it, because you've got to make it flow. For TV, you've got a time slot to fit, so, that's a given. So
It's a little, I would say it's a little different in television because it is a writer's medium. The writers are the producers, and they're very protective of their language. So it's not something like I wouldn't take out. And I encourage, like I've been a supervising editor on other shows, and I tell the editors, your first iteration should reflect the script. And even though I know, we got to restructure this thing, we got to cut the scene in half, that performance is terrible, let's minimize. You have all these ideas, and I say, do versions of all those things. And save them, but you'll get fired if you cut out too much time.
You have to protect.
And I don't want anyone to get fired.
Yeah,
so.
one director actually said, "You don't leave anything for me to do." He was
Right.
pissed because I took out all this stuff,
Right.
which he'd like to have come to that process. But on the other hand, I can argue also that I don't feel like I'm doing my job unless I have that version to present. But you're right. You should back yourself up with the complete version.
Right.
With an Avid, you can do that. Back in the Moviola days, it wasn't very easy.
Right.
You'd have to lift it out. But because especially if I'm on a flow and there's a dialogue scene and there's a tempo and stuff, and I realize that line is redundant from that line and it's much better to cut to that, I feel it's incumbent upon me to try it. Now, if somebody hates it, fine. In an Avid, I protect it. So one of the things you've got to do is feel the political situation. You can ask your director, can I take the initiative and show you stuff without it? Now, they may say, great. Or they may say, no, I want to hear everything that I shot. I want to see everything that I shot. Well, that's clear instruction. Remember I said you're working for the director. at least in features. In TV, maybe not, I don't know. Well, the director gets a cut.
The
Short
director
cut.
gets a cut, and yeah, I mean, it's, this is the thing they never really teach you in film school. It's like all the politics of, how do you serve as a director? How do you also, honor the writer or the person that's in charge, And yeah, you have to feel it's different the landscape is different on every show, and you have to feel it out. You have to be good at communicating with these people and know what their expectations are. And I think it's different. I think if you have a long-standing relationship with the director and you have a shorthand, which is very often the case in features where you work with the director. In television, these directors, they'll come in and do one episode. You'll see them for 5 days in the edit room. That's what the DGA allows. And then they're gone. And then the producers come in who wrote the episode and they go, that guy didn't know what he was doing. And it's really true. And I've directed television also, and so I've been there. But it's all about dialogue. It's all about communicating. And
Derek, and I see you nodding a lot. And
I think in reality, very often, especially when they just give you a bunch of footage and come back, you're writing it and you're hired for your opinion, for your taste.
Right, so you get that.
nice.
I mean, that's where
Yeah.
that whole thing became of editors really being producers. So there are times when you have no masters to answer to.
Right. Well, you do.
You do ultimately. Well, so how does that work out if they leave you alone for 2 weeks?
They'll tell me I have a deadline of 2 weeks, but I'll certainly call them in well before that and show them what I'm doing.
So at
You don't
what
want to
point do
spend
you-
2 weeks going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, at what point do you call them in? When do you say this is time for them to come in? And
Well, I agree. You have to make it presentable.
Yeah.
Like ready to air. Music, yeah.
But it's good to get them in sooner rather than
Yeah.
later. Especially, you're always taking a gamble, because if they hate it,
Right.
who knows what'll happen. But if they think, oh, it's pretty good, but what if you try this? Then you're starting a collaboration
Right.
with a director, producers, it's also studio people, executives, executive producers. I mean, it's kind of a tough thing because everyone might have a different opinion.
Derek, do you find yourself also where you're answerable to many, many people from the...
Well, not all at
Production.
once.
Not all
It goes
at
down a line, yeah. And if they want ketchup on their pastrami, then,
Catch up on their pastrami it is, okay. B, what,
Well, I had the good fortune, I'd say 70% of my work was with 3 people. Except for one of them, they were people with very good taste who knew, which is
Of course,
really...
they picked you.
Well, because they chose me, yes.
You talk about when you're in an interview with Herb Brett and Jan Jackson, who wins and how's the politics of what your choices are?
well,
Herb Ritz wins, I'll tell you that.
yeah, right, Herb Ritz wins,
I was
yes.
Herb Ritz's editor. Herb was more concerned with the stars' looks than the stars were, so he could kind of get away with anything. These people had good taste, and when they saw it, they liked it. I mean, I would agree with when I was happy with it, they were happy with it. And I think that's the worst thing about being editing, when you're happy with it and they're not, and they're happy with something you're not, and then it's just hard to know where to go sometimes.
Or maybe they're never happy.
Yeah, and they're never. Yeah,
Maybe
Maybe they
never
wanted to
happy.
make a
Maybe
different
they're never
movie, but
happy.
it's too late.
But these were people who, when it was right, when we got it, we were kind of all going, it was right. And, but they didn't know how to get there at all, at all. And so that was great, because they
Yes.
gave me good footage. They were always, there was a lot of leeway. I would, to the point of where I put shots, it wasn't like on this verse, there's this happening, it's like, and so it was terrific. It was so, and they gave me the time.
So yeah, that does sound like the ideal situation, because you're the magician then, right?
Yeah.
They don't know how to do what you're doing.
Right.
I mean, have
Then
you...
they all learn. Then now
Learn.
everyone's an editor. That's
Well,
Well, I was just going to ask about that. So
Yeah.
do you have that issue all the time, the rest
Because
of you?
now, a producer, anybody, a writer can have a cut of the film on their
Yeah.
own laptop.
Yeah.
And they could do their own cut if they wanted
Yeah.
to. Now, luckily, I don't see a lot of that, but I'm sure there's some of it. It's just different. Back in the days of moviolas, for example,
Yeah.
You'd come in and watch an editor work on a moviola, maybe you'd last 10 minutes because, you just can't watch it. You have to either be doing it or go away.
right. Well, the screen was this big, right?
Yeah, that helps.
You have to be real close to the editor to
Hey,
watch.
the first Avid, the screen was that big too, practically.
Well, the first Avid, as I recall, the picture quality wasn't all that great.
Oh, it was terrible. It was horrible.
You couldn't see lip
And
sync.
people were standing around it thinking, what is this?
I know someone who edited a film, and it was someone had died, and when she saw the finished film, she realized the person was breathing and she couldn't see it in the Avid.
Oh dear. Oh yeah.
yeah.
Well, there were lots of horror stories about
Stories like
that.
that.
Yeah.
Eye lines.
So
Yeah,
let's
the
talk a
line-
little
yeah.
bit about that working with the director or the producer, what have you, and you know how you deal with like the issue that Bea was talking about when what they like you don't like, what you like they don't like. I mean, how do you handle all of these things? You've talked about it a little bit. Derek, what do you do?
Ultimately, they're the client.
Yes.
So again, catch up on their pastrami, then that's what they're going to get. I may not like doing it, but yeah, I try to make them happy.
So some jobs are better than others because you're more in sync, I take it. Is that
Yes.
you prefer obviously the more in sync ones. How much are they in your bay?
Not very much. Well, also, I mean, no one screens in a bay for me anymore. It's always put up on an FTP site or something.
That's very interesting to me. So they can't, as it's going, say, you
I like
know,
that.
image or.
Best case is you have a talk and then you see time-coded notes that you can discuss.
In one level, it sounds like it might be good they're further away, but that's also the bad side of it is they're further away. Does it work out for you on the whole? Is it in the up position?
No,
or
I
the,
think for me, usually I'd like to work alone, so.
And what about you, Andrew? Are you in the room?
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes the directors come in. It depends on the schedule and if they're moving on to a new show or whatever. I'd like to have somebody in the room. I feel like when I'm screening something, even if they're behind me, I can tell when they don't like something. Kind of develop these feelers, these antennae that go off. Oh God, he shifted his leg. I know that he doesn't like that. Right? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
but it's very important, and you have to learn, skills of diplomacy. You're not going to, and pick your battles. Don't fight everything that that the director wants to change. You have to go, okay, well, this one, it's not that crucial, but I know the big one, I'm really going to try to dig my heels in and persuade them. Sometimes you don't want to attack something head on. You want to kind of come at it from the side. And I try a very Socratic method. I go, what did you think of that? Did that work for you?
See, liberal arts college.
Yeah, and you sort of start
Philosophy.
asking these questions, and you get their wheels turning. Like, does it work for me? And then you can kind of you can kind of come in and say, well, the reason it doesn't work is because, and you kind of open them up to this thing. But if you just come in and go, that didn't work at all, then they put up a wall and they go, what do you mean it doesn't? And you can't get anywhere. So you have to learn the power of persuasion and kind of mind control. And the other thing is that it's really hard to do in television, and it's different in features, is earning somebody's trust. How do you get someone to trust your creative instincts over their creative instincts? Because they're a creative person and you're a creative person, and then they're the director, so they think, I'm really creative. And so you have to, and you earn trust, I think, over time.
I find you have about 10 minutes to earn their trust. I have never won someone's trust when I felt in the beginning, for some reason, they weren't there. And the people who are there with you the first 10 minutes are there for life.
Interesting.
And when you have someone's trust, it's heaven, because you can experiment then. But if you constantly have to kind of prove yourself
Right.
or earn it, you're double thinking. There's this whole process that gets in the way, and you don't come up with anything new.
And it really can hurt the final end product.
It really, there's no, you're not using your instinct.
But you don't know going in, especially if it's a new relationship,
Yeah.
a new director. There's a courting period. It's like any relationship. I mean, it really is a lot like a marriage.
It is.
I mean, you're stuck in that room come hell or high water. I found an interesting thing since I started editing, I guess, in the 70s, like mid to late 70s. It was different then. I mean, we were on Moviolas for one thing, so, people couldn't second guess you. They didn't really hang around a lot. And I worked with both the young directors I had worked with at that time and then some of the older classical studio guys that I also worked with. Generally speaking, would not spend a lot of time in the editing room if they liked what you were doing.
Yeah.
So, it's all down to that. So I would run, first of all, we'd hopefully run dailies and project them, so I'd get their notes. I like take 3. I like that line in take 5, whatever, so you get that stuff. And then if you cut it together and they like it and it's playing, great. Some of these guys, they would give me 5 notes and never come back, or not. I got into a thing where I was coming in on a lot of movies to take over because the studio had a problem. In those days, when that would happen, they just let me free. It's like, help us, make it great. And luckily, they were the kinds of pictures that I was able to do well, because they were action pictures, but I was just on a roll. And I did it, and they worked, and they were fine, so nobody ever came in. But, you know, that's very rare today, really rare. Generally speaking, you get notes ad infinitum. Michael Bay used to come in, but he had a very specific MO. He was looking for cool shots, and that's what he would do. Like, oh, that contrail is beautiful, you know. And take it from there to there to there. And so you'd wind up with a select reel of stuff. Now, you the good news is, if you were on top of your game, you would have already used about 92% of that stuff. But sometimes you find a gem. Why not? It makes it better. Or maybe you've got too many shots in a montage, probably. But, you know, you'd have to negotiate. I worked with a really great director once, and I said, okay, so we'll watch dailies together, and you'll tell me, I like take 6, I don't like take 5, I like this. And so I'll get some of your notes, and I'll try to do it, I try to kind of follow what your vision is. And he said, well, Mark, I could do that. I could tell you what take to use. But I'm afraid if I do that, I'm cheating myself, because I want to see what you come up with. And so you do what you want. I'm not going to tell you what I want, because then you might think that that's actually the best way to do it. Well, of course, I love this guy.
Yeah.
So,
What's the worst thing about editing today in your world? And it doesn't have to be your personally experienced thing. It may be from stuff you see out there.
Well, I think time is, there's just not as much time. And that's the bugaboo I think all of us have. It's the Avid. I mean, the greatest thing in the world is the, I mean, I wouldn't go back for anything, but other people had more to say because it was easy to change. The ease of change, which you would think would make things more creative because you could try things, and isn't that great?
I would agree that,
Time?
yeah, and because of that, in reality, there's less ownership for the editor. It used to be that an editor would do an episode. Now there's 3 or 4 editors, maybe 5 and more, working on the same episode just to get it done.
And I think part of that is the fact that, when you were cutting on a Moviola, you had one picture track, usually one soundtrack that you were kind of keeping going. And now they expect you to have a completely temped, every sound effect. I didn't like that, the way the computer beeped. Like we get these kinds of notes from, network and stuff. That's the way that, I don't like the ring of that cell phone.
Yeah.
And you go, what? I mean, okay, maybe it's valid, but this is a temp mix. If it takes you out of it, I understand, But also with music and everything, so that all adds on. And some of the series that we work on, there's 3 editors and 2 assistants, and so you can only give them so much to do. So you really have to figure out how to divide, how to manage your time properly so you can get all these things. If you want to make it presentable, you want your cut to kick ass, right? Like you want to put music in it, you want to do all these things, but you also can't just be focused on 5 minutes and neglect the entire rest of the project.
absolutely. Because really the most important work that you're doing isn't about the music and sound effects. I mean, that's going to come.
Right.
And that's going to interact with what you've done editorially, so you're going to modify it and fold it into the greater thing. I mean, we used to, again, on Moviola editing, essentially we used to cut with 1 track, and then I would mix stuff down, or I'd build a music track. I used to project in a theater where I could project 3 tracks and mix them on the fly while we were watching the cut, because that was the only way I felt I could present the movie, so at least, without spending money on a temp dub. So
what
and
if
it used to work. So then, suddenly they'd hear music and sound effects, and it's like, oh my God, it's done.
So does that drive you crazy?
With what?
With editing, yeah, with editing today.
Yeah, because it's time. It's back to time, because there's an expectation. As I said, you can't show something that doesn't feel finished. I mean, if you're going to show something that's lumpy, 30, 40 minutes too long, say for a feature film or something like that, why do you think they're going to like it? They're not going to like it. They're like anyone else who came in the room. If the correct length for a particular movie, you can almost sometimes work it out based on experiencing the long cut, and then it's got to be 98 minutes maximum with titles. But when you got a 2.5-hour movie, because the director loves every frame, there's going to be trouble. And, you don't want trouble. You're supposed to know that this isn't going to fly. I mean, it's not always like that. Sometimes they actually put out that 2.5-hour movie.
They do.
Sometimes it's a
And then
big
there's trouble
mistake.
afterwards.
Could be. So anyway, you don't know. The politics are vast. But what you do know is, and the other thing that I don't love, is that there's too many people who want to have a creative voice and they're not necessarily in agreement.
I know.
Now, what we do know is that it's very rare that you get a great movie out of a committee. I mean, try to list them. I mean, there may have been a few, maybe Casablanca was one of them, but generally speaking, that doesn't happen. And think of the really great movies, the movies that you put up at the top of the list, they're usually fundamentally the work of one creative guiding presence. That's what it is. So, now the question, of course, not every filmmaker, not every director is going to be like that. And that's where this collaboration does come in, because some people really do need guidance and help, or the studio may perceive it to be the
Need a
case.
good editor.
They
Well,
need a good
that too.
editor. That's
But-
right.
But it's always best when they get that good editor and actually let the editor do their job, as opposed to like trying to control them, then maybe the result won't be as good.
Well, thank you all so much. We're going to take a little break now and then come back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.